All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're taking a close look at Ryder H. Brandau's book, Justice, A Testament. And right up front, we have to understand this isn't a story, and it's not some simple political pamphlet. The book presents itself as something else entirely. A meticulously constructed architectural plan, a blueprint for understanding justice itself. So, yeah, it's framed as an architectural plan, and it's built using materials from three really different places. You've got historical materialism, the kind of thinking that music teaches you, and a really deep metaphysical framework. The whole point is that it's an integrated system. You can't just look at one room. You have to understand how the whole building fits together.
With any blueprint, you can't really understand it until you understand the architect and what they were trying to do. Why build this thing in the first place? What's the worldview that shaped the design? So let's start there with the context.
And the author's choice of words right here is absolutely crucial. Testament, not manifesto. See, this isn't about trying to persuade you or start a movement. Brandel makes it really clear. This is just a record, a witnessing of a truth as they see it. It's designed to stand on its own, whether anyone else buys into it or not.
The author is also writing from a very specific place, from direct, lived experience with poverty. And this isn't just some biographical detail, it's actually a core piece of evidence for the book's main argument. The book's very existence is used as proof that consciousness can rise above material hardship, which, the argument goes, gives us a moral responsibility to build a world where it doesn't have to.
Okay, so let's get to the bedrock of this whole structure, the material foundations. The book argues that before you can even begin to talk about abstract ideas like justice or freedom, you have to get real and talk about concrete economic power. This Grant Wood painting really captures the idea perfectly. We see this idealized, self-made landscape, but the book forces us to look closer and see the infrastructure, the roads, the houses, the tilled land. All of that is inherited. It's a constructed platform of opportunity. Individual success doesn't just pop up out of nowhere. It happens on a foundation that somebody else built and paid for. So here's the bottom line. Rights on a piece of paper are pretty much meaningless if you don't have the actual material power to use them. The book points to the failure of Reconstruction in the U.S. as its main case study. It argues that giving freed slaves the right to vote without dismantling the economic power of the old planter class created this fragile illusion of freedom, not the real thing. And this brings us to a really key concept that Brandal calls an abortive victory. Think of it like this. You win a war, but you leave all the enemy's weapon factories standing. It's an incomplete win that pretty much guarantees that the oppressive system is just going to rebuild itself, probably in a slightly different disguise.
This painting of Noah's Ark is such a powerful visual for this idea. What do you see? You see preservation, right? Not transformation. The old order is carefully being loaded onto the boat to survive the flood. The book argues this is exactly what happened after the Civil War. The planter class was preserved, allowed to ride out the storm, only to get off the ark and take over again.
And the book makes the case that this pattern of abortive victory just keeps repeating. In every one of these instances, we treated a symptom, but the disease, that underlying power structure, was left untouched. The failure to dismantle the planter class led to Jim Crow. Pardoning Nixon basically taught us that presidents are above the law. And the weak response to January 6 sends the message that trying to overthrow democracy is a pretty safe bet. Each failure just plants the seeds for the next one.
So, if those are the cracks in the foundation, how does the system stop people from even noticing them? Now we're moving inside the building, looking at the internal machinery. The mechanisms, the book says, are designed to suppress our very ability to see the system that we're living in. This painting by Panini is just a perfect metaphor for this. You see this gallery filled with masterpieces, but all that knowledge is presented as separate, fragmented items in a catalog. The book argues that's exactly what modern education does. It takes the whole incredible tapestry of human understanding and just chops it up into useful job skills. It creates specialists who know how to install the pipes, but have absolutely no clue what the building is even for.
And here's the direct comparison the book lays out. On one side, you have technical training, like a huge focus on STEM, which it argues creates compliant workers who just serve the system as it is. But on the other side, you have classical humanistic education, which cultivates the ability to see those power structures and, maybe most importantly, to imagine that things could actually be different. And this ties into another mechanism the book points to, what it calls aesthetic impoverishment. To really get a painting like this one, your brain has to track all these overlapping, independent shapes and colors at the same time. The book's argument is that this is the exact same cognitive muscle you build when you listen to complex classical music. And so depriving people of that kind of training, well, it's not just a cultural shame, it's a political act. And that leads to this pretty stark conclusion. Look, the argument isn't about making everyone a concert violinist. It's that when you take away this kind of education, one that teaches you sustained attention and how to perceive complex, developing structures, you're actually damaging the very mental tools a population needs to govern itself. It's framed as a direct attack on our democratic capacity.
All right, now we get to what you could call the philosophical wiring of this whole project. We've seen the material foundations and the internal machinery. Now we've got to look at the metaphysical ghosts in the machine, the big abstract ideas that are really powering this entire argument. So first, let's unpack this concept of spooks, which is borrowed from the philosopher Max Stirner. A spook is basically an idea that we humans invent, like tradition, or the nation, or justice. We create it in our own minds, but then we kind of forget we made it up, and we start treating it like some external, divine authority that gets to boss us around.
Then the book makes this really provocative claim that modern secular humanism is actually just another spook. The argument is that it keeps the exact same structure as Christianity, sacrificing your own concrete interests for some higher power, but it just swaps out the word God and puts in the word humanity. It's the same logic of self-sacrifice, just worshiping at a different altar. Now, to build its own worldview, the book offers this symbolic expression, which it calls the grand asymptote. And I need to be really clear. This is not a normal math equation you'd solve. Think of it as a metaphysical principle that's just using the language of math to make its point. So let's break down what it's saying. Okay, here's how it works. First, each one in that sum represents a single unique consciousness. Your point of view, my point of view, every single perspective that could possibly exist. Second, the infinite sum is just the collection of all those perspectives. But here's the wild part. It all approaches zero. Now, this isn't the zero of nothingness. Think of a perfect circle. A circle has 0 corners, not because it's missing something, but because it's a state of total completion. This 0 represents a fullness so complete it's beyond simple counting.
This scene from the movie Brazil just perfectly captures the feeling of this idea. According to this framework, reality isn't some stable place you finally get to. Reality is the thing that violently crashes in when our self-made fictions and illusions shatter. The grand asymptote suggests that we're always on an infinite journey towards truth, but we never fully get there and possess it.
So we've looked at the foundations, the mechanisms of suppression, and the metaphysical wiring. Now, finally, we get to the purpose of the whole building. What do we do with all this? It's about synthesizing all this analysis into a set of principles for action. And the conclusions are, well, they're pretty uncompromising. The book calls for what it terms civilizational vigor, arguing that the pursuit of excellence is a duty, but one that needs material support to happen. It pushes for pragmatic radicalism, where the only thing that matters is what actually works, not what sounds ideologically pure. It calls for dismantling inherited wealth as a necessary step for any real meritocracy. And finally, it demands a denazification-style response to anti-democratic forces, not just punishing them, but permanently removing them from power.
So in the end, this architectural plan, this blueprint, it doesn't really give us any easy answers. Instead, it leaves us with this final, stark, and very provocative choice. And it argues this is the only choice that has ever really mattered. Do we commit ourselves to the incredibly difficult, comprehensive work of transformation, or do we accept the alternative, which it frames as a state of permanent oppression?